All right, welcome to Lesson 5-1, Estimating Fractions. Your essential question: I can estimate fractions to 0, half, or whole and perform operations. All right, remember how we estimate fractions? We decide if they're closest to 0, 1/2, or 1 by looking at their numerator and their denominator, finding what is half and saying, is this closest to 0, the whole group, or half the group? The word of the day is compatible. You've probably heard this on like Match.com or something like that. Compatible just means works well together. We're going to talk about how numbers work well together, especially when we divide. So when we add, subtract, and multiply, we don't have to worry so much about the numbers working nicely. But when you divide, there's definitely numbers that work nicer together than others. So we're going to use compatible numbers for those division problems. All right, so if I'm going to estimate on this addition problem, I'm going to look at my mixed numbers and I'm going to decide, are those mixed numbers closer to the lower end? Like, for example, this one, is it closer to the 3? Or would I move it and change it to be a 4? So I'm going to look at this fraction that goes with it and say, is this fraction part closer to 0 or 1 whole? This fraction, 2/3, is bigger than half, so we're going to say, we're going to round that up to 4. 5 and 1/6, well, 1 out of 6 parts is smaller than half because half would be 3 out of 6, right? So since it's less than half, then we're going to keep this a 5 and say this is about 4 plus 5. My answer is about 9. This is important because when we really do add and subtract, we want to have an idea as to, is my answer right or wrong? Okay, if I only have fractions, I want to be more specific. So if I'm dealing with a really tiny number, I want to make sure that I'm even more specific because they're tiny and any little change might make it a bigger change. So when I have just a plain old fraction, not a mixed number, no whole numbers with it, I'm going to estimate to either 0, 1/2, or 1. So I need to get even more technical or more specific. So 2/3 is that hard one. Remember, half of 3 is 1.5. So if this is the halfway point, is 2 closer to half, or is it closer to the whole thing? It's actually closest to half. Okay, minus 1/6 is closest to 0, and I get an answer of 1/2. All right, here's another example of a mixed number. So if it's a mixed number, we're going to change it to a whole number. 2/5, well, 2.5 is the halfway point out of 5, so this is slightly less than half, so I'm going to leave it as a 6. 7/8, well, that's almost the whole thing, so I'm going to bump this up to a 2, and I have 6 times 2, which is 12. You try this one. Pause the video. Okay, 1/7, you should have gotten 0. 3/5, remember this is saying, is it closest to 0, 1/2, or 1, so that should be 1/2, and your answer should be 1/2. Try this one. Okay, this first one's less than half, so I'd call that 4. Second one's less than half, so I'd call that 5, and I get 20 as my answer. All right, use compatible numbers. So here you see we have a division sign, and whenever we have a division sign, we want to make a division problem that works. So if I round this one correctly, I get 9. If I round this one correctly, I get 3. Does that work? Sure. 9 divided by 3, that works very nicely to get my answer of 3. Let's say that this one, however, was 8 divided by 3. We may instead fudge a little on our estimation and say, well, that's close to 9, which would work out nicely. That's what compatible means. Here's another example. So here, if I round this one, I would get 10. If I round this one, I would get 1. 10 divided by 1 is just 10. Try these problems. Remember number 3 and number 4, you might have to fudge a little. Okay, your answer should be, this should be 5 times 2, which is 10. This should be 0 plus 1, which is 1. This should be 9 divided by 3, which is 3. And this should be 7 divided by 1, which is 7. All right, now something kind of tricky. We're looking at this as a fraction times a whole number. Think of a fraction times a whole number as more of a division problem. Remember that the word of can mean multiplication. So 1/3 of 14 is another way of saying this. So if I want 1/3 of 14, I want to take 14 and split it into 3 groups, okay, equal groups. So basically I'm dividing. That doesn't divide nicely, so look over here, you can see I have 15 divided by 3 instead of 14 divided by 3, because if I go up or I go down just by 1, I don't want to go up or down too much, but if I go up or down by 1 and it works nicer, I'm going to use that instead. So I'd have a group of 5, a group of 5, a group of 5, and this is saying one piece of my 3 groups, right? So I'm going to take one of these, and my answer would be 5. Another way to think of this is if you're multiplying by something with a 1 on the top, you just divide by the number on the bottom. Okay, so 1/4 of 21. Again, I'm going to change that and say let's make that 20 so that I can make easily 4 equal groups. 20 divided by 4, my answer is 5. 1/3 of 17. Again, let's change this. How about we make it 18? I can split 18 into 3 equal groups, and I get 6. Here's a division problem. If I have 12 divided by 5.5, well, that rounds to 6. Remember, if you get right at that halfway point, that we're going to round up, and I get 2. 9 7/8. I would call this 10. Divided by, I would call that 4. Uh-oh, we've got an issue, right? So here's a case where we need to either round up or round down to make this work out more nicely. I would say, could I change this one by just 1? If I can, I'm going to do that. So 10 add 1 is 11. 11 divided by 4 doesn't work. 10 take away 1 is 9. That also doesn't work out nicely. What if I change this one by 1? If I make it a 5, does it work? It sure does. So we're going to say that's about 2. So change this to a 5. We always want to change the first one first if possible because it makes less of a difference in your answer. Okay, you try this one. Okay, did you get 36 divided by 6 or 35 divided by 7? So I would say answers may vary on this one depending on how you rounded that one. Try this one. Did you change this to a 30 and say 30 divided by 3 equals 10? That's what you should do. Here's one more to try. Okay, did you leave this as 25? Then decide, you know what, this is right in the halfway point. Let's leave that as a 5 and get 5 as your answer. It is time to do your NAICU check. If you don't have access for some reason to NAICU or you don't see it on there, please do the page 233, check your understanding. You can write it right on your Cornell notes. Have a good night.